Dear developers, let's talk about what makes your web application feels like native for this particular platform, for all platforms, for all the users. And let's check what's available from the web technologies for us to achieve this goal. Yeah, so this will be our two main points for today's session. First, we will list all these points, all criteria, what makes your application feels native, and check how can we map our findings to web technologies. My name is Maxim Salnikov. I do developer engagement in Microsoft. I'm based in Oslo, Norway, and I'm a big fan of progressive web applications and even bigger fan of developer communities. I myself organize a bunch of meetups in Oslo where I live. I'm one of the co-organizers of Progressive Web Apps Summit we had in 2021, and we hope that we'll have next edition this year. And I'm a developer expert in web technologies, and in particular in capabilities and installability sections. Let's stay connected. My Twitter is webmaxru. I tweet mainly about progressive web apps, about web frontend, and about cloud technologies. Before we start with native web applications, let's dedicate a few moments to discuss what actually makes web an application platform. Because web was invented more than 30 years ago, definitely not like an application for building, running, distributing the applications. No, it was just like a network of interconnected documents, right? So what made web like we have it today? And what is the status of today's web? First, we have browsers that are evergreen, and it opens so many doors for us as developers, so we don't have to care about which particular version is installed on this particular user device. And to be honest, I have no idea which version of Chromium engine I have behind my Microsoft Edge browser now, and I don't want to check and say it now because when you watch this recording, this version might be updated. And yeah, I know that it's like close to 100 somehow, right? And I believe it's the case for a majority of the developers. So we can use latest and greatest features of the browsers, of the web APIs they expose, more or less safe, of course, keeping in mind progressive enhancement and feature detection, right? So not to ruin basic application experience. If we talk about the way we build applications, we have JavaScript, right, as a main language for web frontend. Maybe this is no longer correct that it's the only language. Of course, I'm not even saying about a bunch of languages we transpile to JavaScript. No, I'm speaking about native ones for the web frontend. And a few years ago, JavaScript lost its exclusiveness just because now we have WebAssembly, and that opens doors to a bunch of other languages to be native ones for the web. But it's definitely it deserves separate session and maybe even separate conference. We have performant JavaScript engines. So folks who build browsers and JavaScript engines in particular, they dedicate so much efforts to make them as perfect as possible. So sometimes we even have a chance to build our own JavaScript code, maybe not super optimal, not super perfect, because we know that in many cases this will still be optimized by the engines, by the places where we actually execute this code. And I believe web has the best-in-class tooling for building applications. very broad spectrum of what we have here, starting from great libraries, great frameworks, UI components, and up to support of web technologies, web language. We have in IDEs all this IntelliSense, and maybe we can also mention GitHub Copilot. If you didn't check it, please give it a try. You'll be amazed, I promise. And after all, last but not least, huge community. We are millions of people who build web applications, web front-end applications to be precise, so we can always find an answer to our question. We can always find solution to our issue just by asking people around us. It's a really great time to build web front-end applications now. But it was on the plus side. What about minuses of the web? Well, obviously, since web was not invented, was not created like a place where we build what we call applications, there are some, downsides. First, historically, it depends too much on connection status, on always being connected to internet, intranet, you name it, something that is outside of this particular user device where they or we run the application. And the second one, yes, it's connected too closely to the browser, to the place where we open this web page, web projects, websites, you name it. And it's hard to reason about web application like about application written for this specific platform. That is first-class citizen for this platform, because it's always somewhere in the browser. And today's session is exactly about second point in this list of disadvantages. And actually, this is how idea of progressive web apps started. In June of 2015, there was an article from Alex Russell saying exactly about that, how to escape from the browser, how can our applications, our web projects can escape the browser without losing their soul, their nature of web, its openness, discoverability, linkability, all the great things that build huge list of advantages of web platform. Fast forward to our days. Recently introduced edition for 2021 of Web Almanac, and in particular its PWA chapter, where I took some part in creating of this report, says that over 3% of web addresses are driven by service workers. And this is, so we can approximate it and say that these addresses are PWAs, progressive web applications. And furthermore, these 3% of addresses, of course, we talk here about a particular sample that Web Almanac analyzes, around 7 million addresses. So these 3% actually drive around 1/5 of world internet traffic. Isn't that cool? That sounds pretty amazing. So this is about service workers, so one part of progressive web apps. Second part is about installability. Here we can approximate number of installable web sites like 1.5 million. This is approximation done by Maximiliano Firtner, who is a well-known researcher of progressive web apps. This number, well, of course, it's not surprised that we have quite a few web applications that are installable, because it tries to take best parts from these two worlds. Like when we use native language, native frameworks, native everything to build applications for very specific platform, because if we talk about native, there is no chance to organize kind of cross-platform experience, right? So on nativeness axis, of course, native apps, they win by number and depth of integrations of this particular application with underlying platform, starting from operating system. On the rich axis, we have web, and yeah, there is no chance to compete with web platform at all. So web is by default larger, more open than any other application ecosystem. So these 1.5 million applications, which are installable, they try to grab the best of these two directions, to be native enough and to still maintain reach that is possible only for web technologies. So what's available? I actually sat and tried to list few things that, in my understanding, make the application feels like native. And I put these findings into some categories. First, it all starts with installation and start of this application. Well, maybe in real life, it's we can do even step back and start reasoning about how you actually find the application you want to install and run. But it's out of scope for today's session. Then, since we talk about web front-end applications, we reason about something with user interface. And in that sense, it's very important how this window of application is playing with surroundings, with all what's around this app. So how can we make sure that its window is real native window? Then a bunch of outbound integrations. When we want to use some features of underlying operating system or maybe even hardware, it's nice to have these possibilities. Then inbound integration. This is when operating system wants something from our app, for example, started in some non-regular way. You'll see what I'm talking about when we go to this chapter of the presentation. Then notifications. There is no chance to build native enough application without connection with native notification that are part of pretty much all modern platforms or operating systems, you name it. Then if you talk about more or less complex apps, we often need power of running some tasks in background. For example, for scheduling or for detaching some processes from the one that drives UI thread. Well, it's nice to have this opportunity. And of course, access to hardware. We definitely want to leverage the power of all these media capabilities, a bunch of sensors we have in devices, especially mobile ones, straight from our JavaScript code without any intermediate layer. Ready? Let's go. First, fasten your seatbelts. We are on the cutting edge of technology. This is why if you wish to follow all the points of integration I will list on the next slides, I strongly recommend you to enable corresponding flags in your browser. This is where you can find it in Microsoft Edge. You can find similar UI in Google Chrome browser. Find everything what contains PWA in the description. You can easily filter this and enable everything. And disclaimer, I intentionally do not say what's available where, in which browser, which version, which platform now. The same reason. I just don't want to be wrong because it might change while I speak. So for some of the features which are highly experimental now can be in production tomorrow. This is why remember about progressive enhancement, about feature detection, and use it. Let's go. Installation and run. How do we install web front-end application? Of course, we use web app manifest specification and corresponding file. And what are the criteria of installability. This manifest I mentioned, plus having service worker with at least fetch event. So browser can do their best guess that there is a reason for making this application installable, and the reason is it's offline ready. And yeah, this is why we have this requirement with fetch event in service worker. Web app manifest is quite well-known specification. It's with us for some years, and it's actually under active development. More and more options, parameters are finding place in this specific specification. On this example, you see maybe like the most obvious ones. A few of them are required actually to have your application installable. But yeah, it all starts with giving a name and providing some icons. Because if we wish to call website, web page, web project, and application, definitely we need to provide some metadata that every application has, name and icon, right? This is how it works these days. And if your web site is following this criteria, you will see, or no, you and your users will see some hints for installation in form of, for example, icon in address bar and some menu, install name of your application in the browser main menu. And if user click this, they will see some extra dialogues to just make sure that they really want this application to be installed on their device. These dialogues, of course, look differently on different browsers, on different platforms, but idea is general. So this is just some initial request. Then if we talk about Microsoft Edge, there'll be a next dialog window with request of some extra parameters. For example, your application can start with operating system start or on login. And after all, your app will take its proud place in list of applications. And in my example, this is how it works on Microsoft Edge browser in Windows 10, and it will even take place in list of installed applications, so you can think about it like a really native app, and yeah, you can even, or your users can even fine-tune some parameters. Next, if you wish to provide some extra functionality for your application in form of shortcuts. For example, on desktop systems, this is when you right-click on application icon and you see some extra ways to start it. You can also do this in web now for your web front-end application. Use the same web app manifest file. There is an option called shortcuts where you provide first name of the shortcut, then you might have some extra icons that maybe illustrate what the action will perform, and then it will look like this, and it will start your application in some specific way you provided by some custom URL. And launch mode. This is maybe not super widely spread option of web app manifest yet, but it gives nice options, nice possibilities for us developers to decide what to do with on application start in case of another window with the same application is already running. And we can decide. We can just ignore the fact that user already started this application and there is already a separate window with your web frontend app running, or we can, instead of launching next window right next to existing one, we can just focus existing one. And on focus, we decide what to do. We can reload this application immediately, or we can organize some kind of queue and do some actions later. We have all the parameters how the user started this application available for us in corresponding web APIs. Good. Windowing, how is this working? What are the possibilities? How exactly can we escape the browser and create our own window for our application? We have property called display in Web App Manifest. And there are some options available. For example, it can be standalone window, it can be full screen, it can be a window with minimal UI, like back button, because let's be honest and open, not all web front-end applications are actually ready to behave like native apps, just because of UI is not that perfect. So there is no way to go back using back button if there is no button exposed by the browser itself, and this is quite useful, right, to have this opportunity in web apps. So for this case, just go for minimal UI. And we have newer property called display override, where we can be a bit more safe in providing experimental features, or like experimental these days, like the one you see on the screen called window control overlay. So older browsers will just ignore this display override and fall back to regular display. But what we can do with window control overlay, we can control what exactly constructs title bar of the window, if we want to have this title bar at all, if this is not a full screen experience. For example, we can put some extra text, buttons, input, whatever you want, straight into the window title bar. How to do this exactly? We have corresponding CSS variables and corresponding JavaScript API to exactly position what we want to have there. We can also disable status bar hints when users hover over some links. Maybe this is how native applications behave, right, compared to web. And also we can use power of native tabs with corresponding display property tabbed. And currently this is a bit experimental feature, so users will be asked explicitly, do they want to go for this experiment? And let's say it doesn't work perfectly in current versions of the browser, so this is experimental after all, but the idea is beautiful. Just imagine, there are quite a few of web front-end applications that use this or that form of what we can call tabs for kind of multi-window interface. And in many cases, maybe majority of the cases, we as web front-end developers have to implement these tabs ourselves using HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Of course, there are a bunch of corresponding controls in UI frameworks, but why not to use the native ones? Because tab is very natural, if not core, part of browser UI, and we can leverage it in our applications as front-end developers. The idea is amazing. I can't wait when it gets to production-ready state. Next category called outbound integrations. Web Share API. This is maybe the most mature from all lists we go through today. And this is in case when we want to call share dialog from our web front-end application. And it's important to understand here that we do not build UI of this dialog. We don't care how that looks. It looks differently on different operating systems, on different platforms. Our goal is to invoke this native experience and maybe then get results. Was it successful or not? And this is what exactly Web Share API does. Similar idea for picking contacts. Not a secret that majority of today's platform ecosystems have something like address books. They all look differently, behave differently, have different features. What we want to get from them for our web front-end application is contact itself, is the data about contact. We don't care about how this dialog looks, and we can achieve exactly what we want using contact picker API. Then we will again invoke native APIs, native UI controls, get data for our JavaScript application. And the most exciting from this list is File Access API, where we can read and write files on file system of operating system straight from our JavaScript code. Again, how these dialogues on opening and saving files look, it's up to operating system. We just want to get things done. We just want to either read or write file without need to wrap our web front-end application, our JavaScript code, into some native wrappers. Isn't that cool? Next category, inbound integrations. It's about the way to invoke your progressive web application, your installed web application, in some interesting ways. For example, you can register your own protocol. Just use protocol handlers property in web app manifest, and you can register your very own protocol, for example, instead of HTTPS, for your application. It's super useful to provide interoperability between your application and some surrounding applications that can invoke your app by just providing this protocol. Next, two properties are close to each other, and they explain behavior of the application when it's invoked with some URLs. For example, declarative link capturing, it's similar to what we had in launch handler of installation section, but mapped to address bar. So what will happen? Will you want to open your application in existing tab where it's already running, or open the new one? URL handlers is your way to start application from third-party origins, or for example, from subdomains. It's actually the place where you register origins or URLs that will start your installed application instead of opening this URL. Of course, to avoid all possible hijacking of the URLs, if we talk about some third-party origin, separate file called web app origin association has to be deployed there, just to make sure that owners of this hostname really want to start some third-party application instead of their own ones. A bit similar concept called file type handlers, when you can just register your web front-end application as a handler for particular extensions of the files. Like in my example, I just registered MP3 extension for being opened by my progressive web app, and it works fine. Share, and yeah, of course, you can get all parameters after in your code when you have this signal to start your application as a handler for for file extension. Share target, it's the one that actually registers your particular web front-end application in the list of apps that exist in share dialog. So just imagine there is, and of course, yeah, it's like opposite side of share of web share API, and basically you can invoke share dialog where your application will be registered as share target. So it's like you share for your, the application will share for itself. But it's an amazing opportunity to build application that are relevant to social networking. And then your app will be invoked the way where you receive information, what to share, or what title, what description, and then you decide what to do exactly, which, for example, API endpoint do you want to call. Notifications. What's important to mention here is that if we talk about nativeness of the application, we of course mean native notification. So it's not just some dialogues in our web frontend application created using your favorite UI framework. No, we want to invoke the notification built into operating systems. For example, this is the case for Web Push API. This is also quite mature API. The only thing I can mention now is let's hope that soon we get Web Push API available on iOS, on our iPhones and iPads. I hope that work is underway on that area. Then badging. This is the specific way to notify users of your application by showing some part of UI over the application icon, over installed application icon. Also, not something new. We have badges as part of native mobile applications for many years. Now it's also available for the web, and it's a nice opportunity to make your web front application closer to operating system. This is exactly what this session is about. And notification triggers is the way to postpone your notification, the same one which we have in Web Push, for example, but for some time in the future. And the core difference from Web Push API is the fact that we don't need internet connection at the time of the notification, because it's scheduled. It's not something that goes from messaging service via some channel. Briefly about background tasks, a bunch of them are available for us as developers to make our app more native. The only thing I want to remember, highlight and remind is the fact that we have awesome way to debug background tasks in DevTools, because sometimes it's quite challenging to test, build, debug all these background things. Now we have we have the chance to record what's going on. Yeah, it's super useful. Access to hardware, whole bunch of APIs are available to reach out to hardware functionality without any extra intermediate layers, without any wrappers, straight from our JavaScript code. The last question I want to highlight is where to follow all these updates, because there is a whole stream of new information pretty much every single week related to these points of integration of web application and operating system. Fugu tracker is my answer number one. You'll find all the details if you filter by PWA string, and also corresponding GitHub repo on manifest incubations, all the latest and greatest pieces of web app manifest, which is crucial for integration points of web application and platform, and my reminder about origin trials. Please use this feature of modern browsers. So, answering question, native web, are we there yet? I give you a chance to answer this question yourself. Just want to list the things we went through during today's session. Are we there yet? I don't know. I hope so. Thank you very much.